Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain. I'm Shannon Zeman, and thank you for joining us on today's The Most Important 15 Minutes of Your Day, where we share expert information on safety and preparedness that you can use in your everyday life. 8 months ago, our world was turned upside down by COVID-19, and our youth have been kept home from school and denied social interaction with friends and family. There's an unsettling rise in teen suicide, and we need to know how to help our teens. Today, my friend Lauren Stalling is joining me to educate us on the right time to speak to our teens about suicide and the warning signs to watch for. Lauren is a California licensed marriage and family therapist who has spent her career advocating for mental health and suicide prevention. Her counseling experience with children and families span over 15 years through multiple settings. Lauren has spent a majority of those years in the school setting providing school-based mental health services for students and their families. She is most proud of being the leader of the first California high school to initiate the Hope Squad program. Hope Squad is a peer-based suicide prevention program based out of Utah and aimed at training youth on destigmatizing mental health, knowing the signs of suicide, and ultimately leading their peers to help and safety. Lauren also regularly trains school staff on suicide prevention and is passionate on sharing her expertise on this subject. And that is why I've asked her to join us today, because she is a wealth of knowledge and one of my friends and one of the people I always go to when I have questions about my boys. So I'm so excited that you joined me.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today.
Yes. Okay. So let's just dive right in. So why is this so important to consider, like we've talked to me before, when to talk to our teens?
I think more than ever right now, this is the time to really talk about it. This is not an issue that wasn't that just came up with COVID. Right. This has been an issue for a really long time. And suicide, just to throw out a statistic, is the second leading cause of death for individuals between the age of 10 and 24 years old.
Wow.
So when you're looking at that second leading cause, the first is accidents. And so when you look at suicide is preventable. And yet it's still such a high number. And why I think I'm so happy that you brought me on to talk about this is because I think that families and parents are scared to talk about suicide with their kids. And I really hope that this conversation today helps explain why you shouldn't be scared to have that conversation and why having that conversation could save a life.
I think you're right on, as a parent, you're always afraid you don't want to plant the seed of a thought. And so instead of bringing it up, sometimes we just ignore it. But I feel like in anything on driving a car, we have to, you go through steps and learning and everything about it. I think this is a great thing that you're here to help us and to kind of take the, like you said, the stigmatism away from it. So I think that would be great. So can you explain to us some of the warning signs about suicide, maybe what we should educate our kids to look for or what we should be looking for?
Yeah, the first thing I really want to point out to and just have everyone be aware of is the brain development that's going on with teenagers and why that's so important because the brain is still developing and the brain is not fully developed until they're 25 years old. Right. So when you have these arguments with your teenager of like, why didn't they just do this? And why didn't they just pick up things? Or why did they make that stupid decision? It's because this area is underdeveloped.
Which is so hard to remember because they look, especially in high school, they look like they're big people.
They do. And it's hard to, I think, as adults, put ourselves back into the shoes of an underdeveloped brain because our brains, hopefully, are in a good spot.
Maybe.
But that's just why. I just want people to acknowledge that they don't have all of the connections made yet. Yeah. And this is a really important time to model the right things to do and to talk about what the right things are to do. And when they do make mistakes, not pointing it out necessarily always as like this big mistake that can't be corrected. It's how can we learn from these mistakes? So that's the biggest thing I want people to acknowledge.
I love that. Say that again because I need to remember that all the time, but I love that for their age and how we parent.
Yes. So the mistakes being, we can't always look at everything as bad, right? We are always looking at it. It's a learning experience. What did I do wrong? And what can I do differently next time? The goal is, yes, I made a mistake, but the goal is what do I learn from that to correct it for the future? So that's why you do have to have your teenagers sometimes make mistakes, which I know is hard for parents.
It really is. It really is.
So getting into a little bit of the warning signs, it's really important. I think, if families are listening to this, kids are listening to this, I really want you to pick up on some of these things, because 4 out of 5 attempts and completions of suicide will have shown signs. So there is a level where sometimes is not, because suicide can be very impulsive. And again, we're thinking of that brain development being underdeveloped and not being able to really hone in that impulse control. But the main things to really look for are the changes in their mood. So I know that teenagers are moody already.
Oh boy, welcome to my house.
But we are looking for things that are out of the norm, or things that are a quick shift. And so one thing to really point out too is that with children and adolescents, depression sometimes exhibits as irritability or anger. And so that's not as common as for adults, where you have more of the sadness and those kind of emotions. So looking at really increased irritability or anger or outbursts, that's a sign to always just to be aware of.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah. So it's always good to know, because they think that, my teenager's just being a jerk. Well, it could be that maybe there is some depression going on too.
Okay.
So the mood, you're looking at mood, you're looking at changes in behavior. So they're engaging in a lot more risky taking behaviors. They're, maybe there's some drug use going on. Maybe they're starting to give away their belongings. And so that's a really key thing to look for, because if a teenager gives away their laptop or their cell phone or something that is very important to them, you have to be asking yourself, why are they giving away something so important? So that's always something to consider as well. We're looking at verbal statements as well. So right nowadays, you're going to see a lot of these on social media. So there is a lot of, and I don't necessarily always want to say it's a cry for help, but there are postings that do happen when a teenager is trying to reach out for that lifeline because they're too scared to ask for help for themselves. So be aware of those social media posts of, I just can't be here anymore. There's no point. Goodbye, everybody. Things like that. And so this could be through social media. This could be for an actual conversation, text messages. I can't tell you how many peers I've had come in to let me know somebody was struggling from a social media post.
So again, that piggybacking on that, doesn't that resonate the importance of following your child on social media, or kind of glancing over their phone on messages that they're sending or things? Would that be
I think that's a tricky one, because as a teenager too, you want them to learn how to be autonomous from you as well. So a little bit of that is finding the right balance of giving them their independence. And so I don't always super support looking at everything that they're doing on their phones, but I do think that some guidance and some supervision with it is okay. It's just, especially if you have younger ones, really being on it with the younger ones. But as they get older, I know that's a tricky subject, and that's an opinion I think for every family member has to figure out what's the right balance for that. So those are kind of the main things that we're looking at as far as warning signs go. We're looking at mood, behavior, statements. So talk. Okay. Some things to consider too is if there's a family history of suicide, or if they've just lost somebody as well. There have been stories. There was a story that was told to me from a Hope Squad training that I went through. The teenager had broken up with his girlfriend, and he decided, well, I'm just going to shoot myself, and by Sunday we'll be back together. So when you think of the kind of the brain development, you're hitting the brain development, and like not really thinking clearly, and then you're thinking of this huge event that happened in their life. So we have to consider right now, COVID is that huge event that's going on for teenagers. So just being aware that this is really difficult for them and that we just need to make sure that we have this conversation with them. And I'm going to give some helpful tips on how to talk with your teens as well.
Yeah, I would love that, because that's definitely an area that, like the sex talks isn't fun either, but these are conversations that we have to have with our kids. And unfortunately, I've never gotten a manual that's explained to me how,
I don't think there is one.
We just never have that. So how do we approach this by talking with our children, and what is it that we say, or how do we start this conversation?
You just start it. So, and you had mentioned it earlier that you were worried that if we talk about it, it plants the seed. But the research will show that is not supported, that actually talking to somebody about suicide actually relieves the stress with it. So that person then goes, oh my gosh, this person is willing to talk to me about this really taboo topic, and they're okay with it. I can now talk about how I'm feeling. So that's what you want it to be. And you want to be very, very specific on the wording. You want to say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you had any thoughts of suicide? You don't really want to skirt around it.
Okay.
Using suicide is the best language to use, because then they know they're okay with talking about it, and they're okay with just saying it. So if you have to have a conversation in front of your mirror before and practice saying suicide, I encourage it. I'm okay with saying it because I've had to ask the question so many times to teens that to me it's just second nature. I don't beat around the bush with it. I just go straight to it. But a lot of times after you have that conversation, they just release, and you can see it in the body language too. They just go, oh my gosh, I just feel so much better just talking about it now. And so that's the main thing, is you just need to listen. It's not the time to go in and save the day. It's the time to use your active listening and some empathy, and just say, wow, that must have been really hard for you to say that. And I really appreciate you sharing that with me. And so those statements alone will be more impactful than, let's get you help right now. What can I do to help you?
Right.
So just sitting with them in that moment and thanking them for sharing that information and going, okay, so now that we've talked about this, let's talk about how we can support you.
That's perfect. And so that piggybacks me into my next question of, if our child or a friend or anybody has contemplated in it, how do we go about getting help?
Yes. So there's a lot of different ways to access help. The first thing really to consider, if in the moment that person is in danger of hurting themselves or others, and you are unable to keep them safe, the number one thing to do is to take that person to the emergency room so they can be evaluated. There is a process that happens for teenagers. They'll be admitted into the emergency room, and then a team from the county comes out to assess to see if they need to be hospitalized or not. If not, then they are released to their parents. They go home. And so it can be a very lengthy process. So it's always good for people to be aware that this is really only for the situations where this person is actively in a state where they are going to, they are wanting to act on suicide.
Okay.
So you can always call the police department to come out to your home as well. They can do the assessments as well. That's not always, the best option, right? To have police officers come into your home. It really depends. But I do want to put it out there that police officers are very helpful in these situations. And I want people to not use that situation, but it is always good to go at least to the emergency room to get the care that they need for that situation. And again, you're only utilizing emergency room or police officers if it's immediate danger to self or others. If it's something that can wait, then call your pediatrician the very next day, schedule an appointment, talk about what's going on, run some medical tests, do some blood work. It's always good to rule out anything medical that could be going on.
What kind of blood work?
Just like a standard blood panel. Okay. Yeah. And just to make sure that there's not, a deficiency of some kind, or maybe something else that could be going on. And then talk about some referrals for support from there. You can always access insurance referrals too by looking at the back of your insurance card for supports. 211 is also another great number to call if you're looking for what's available for teen therapy or teen supports. You can always just call 211. That's it.
Yeah.
Tell them what your needs are. That person on the other line will tell you exactly everything that they can come up with.
Perfect.
They do the search for you. So it's great.
Then even another new thing I've learned today. Yes. I love it.
Yes. And then Dee Hirsch is a really, really great resource. And I wish, we weren't in COVID and we could do more things in a group setting, but Dee Hirsch has a lot of great resources. I believe that they're doing a lot of online supports as well, but they really specialize with individuals who have attempted suicide, family members who are survived by somebody who has completed suicide. So they do a lot of groups, and they do a lot of healing for family members and for friends and for the individual themselves if they've had attempts or have had these situations.
And that's so important to take care of the whole family.
Yes, it is. So those are really, really great resources. Dee Hirsch, it's 2 words. And then the last number I want people to have, and maybe just to have in your phone, is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And so this number is available 24 hours a day. You can call in at any time. There is always a person that will be able there to talk you through things. They might ask you some information so that they can send help. So that is something I want people to be aware of. But the number is 800-273-8255.
Perfect. And we will also put the phone number and these other links on our blog. So if anybody is wanting them, you can always go to our blog under this podcast and be able to find all that information and more. So I want to thank you so much for being here. There's so much more we want to talk about. So Lauren will be coming back, and I'm hoping to get her on here like every other month. If there's any questions that anybody has on this subject or any other teen and family questions that you might have for Lauren, you can always email me and we'll put those to the front of our next conversation. We're trying to keep this really live. My kids are going through home, schooling at home and distance learning, and everything's really hard for everybody. So is there any last tidbits that you'd like to share or any closing?
Yeah, I just want to say, I know it's a hard time for everybody. So just making sure that we're all taking care of ourselves. Self-care is super important right now. Yeah. Nobody should be thinking that they don't have time to take care of themselves. So just make sure your basic needs are always met, that you've had food, you've had water, you've gotten outside to exercise a little bit, and then find something in your day, whether it's just 5 minutes of your day that's just for you, that you do for yourself, because that 5 minutes can just reset your whole day and get you to a place where you're able to take on whatever is going to get thrown at you.
I love that. I've been playing in the mornings at my house, Don't Worry, Be Happy, and being really stupid and dancing around the house and making my boys just laugh at me. I try to get them to dance, but they won't dance. But just getting them to laugh to change that mood. So I love that.
You have to do that.
Yes. So I have loved this conversation. I hope that Lauren has helped educate you as much as she has myself, and a lot of great takeaways I'm going to take from today's podcast, and I really appreciate that. So join me next week when Detective Troy Zeman and I discuss tactical considerations for RUN, which is part of the Run, Hide, Fight mantra to help you get out of dangerous situations safely. Again, thank you so much for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You have just been listening to the most important 15 minutes of your day with me, Shannon Zeman, and you can listen to this podcast wherever you find your podcasts. And just remember, with knowledge, you have the power.